Welcome everyone to another coffee tasting. I'm your host, Aaron Taylor, and today we are going to be tasting the Rwanda Sholi by Starbucks. This is a really good coffee. It's definitely different than what we're normally used to when we drink our coffee. With this, we're going to get some bitter floral notes as our initial reaction with the coffee, and then as those bitter floral notes wash away, we're going to get some bright raspberry toffee sweet notes. And so it's a really, really good cup of coffee, and the meaning of the name is amazing, and we're going to explore a little bit about the meaning of the name, and we're going to explore the coffee notes as well. So for those of you who have been to these coffee tastings before, welcome back, and for those of you who are new, welcome. And for those of you who are new, we like to try our coffee 3 different ways. Right now I have a Chemex pour over and French press setup, and the reason why I do this is to fully explore the different flavor notes that we get from our coffee, but explore the different flavor notes that are extracted through the different brew methods. And so with each different brew method, we're going to get a different amount of sediments, a different amount of oils. It's also going to have a different grind amount. And so all this is going to affect the different flavors that we're extracting out of our coffee. And the reason why I do this is so that we can better understand the different flavor notes that we get from our coffee, and then just to fully explore, to really understand what coffee we like ourselves, because everyone likes different flavor notes in their coffee. For me, I like those chocolate nutty notes. And so I tend to choose my brew method to bring out the more chocolatey notes or more earthy nutty notes. And then if it is a bright citrusy coffee, then I will choose a brew method to lower down the citrusy notes so it's not so bright. And so what I'm brewing is going to impact my brew method. And the only way I was able to learn this was just by brewing all these different coffees, different ways to learn how the different brew methods affect the flavors, and to just really extract the flavor that I'm looking for when I drink coffee. And I explain the different flavor notes that so that everyone else can kind of experience it and learn for themselves what flavor notes that they want for themselves. So when we brew our coffee on a pour over and a Chemex, it's really important to bloom your coffee. And what that means is we're just pouring a little bit of coffee or a little bit of water on top of our grinds, just getting it saturated and letting a lot of that air come to the surface. Sometimes we get like a really cool like dome effect. Sometimes you just get like little miniature domes and the bubbles popping at the surface. But what that allows is it allows all the grinds to get slightly saturated. It allows some of the air in between the grinds to escape, and that allows us to get a more even brew so that we're not getting like an over extracted coffee. It's not taking too long, because if you don't properly bloom your coffee, you might end up with something that's slowing down the brew process, and you're just going to end up with a bitter cup of coffee. So with the small lot coffees, they have very distinct flavor notes that they have that come from the land that they are grown in, depending on like the weather patterns that they have, what other crops that they grow by in the neighborhoods of the same coffee farms, and then also what they put back into the ground. All of that is going to affect the flavor of the coffee. And so with this coffee, we're getting those bright or those bitter floral notes with the bright raspberry and sweet toffee flavors. And so with this one, me typically, I don't normally like the floral flavors in coffee, but typically when you get floral flavors in coffee, you're getting like bright floral notes. While this one, we're getting more of a bitter floral flavor, so it's not as bright and dry as you would get if you were getting like a bright floral coffee, like if it was like a bright hibiscus notes. I really like this coffee for the flavor notes, even though I don't typically go for these flavor notes. because I tend to lean away from the bright floral or just floral notes in general and the bright fruity flavors. And so for this, having floral and raspberry notes, it's actually really good. And we are going to explore the different flavor notes that we get from each different brew method side by side. So we're going to start off with the French press. And so when I describe the different flavor notes that we get from coffees, I like to describe how we have the two main flavor patterns that we're going to look for in coffee when we taste it. So we have our bitter notes, like the chocolates, earthy, nutty notes, and then we have our bright notes. And then the bright notes can be the floral, citrus, and like roasty notes. And then sometimes the nutty notes can be the bright notes, like a toasted hazelnut. That toasted hazelnut is going to give us that roastiness, and that roastiness is going to be the bright part of the coffee. And then with the floral, like an example in this coffee, can be a bitter note. So we're getting bitter florals. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be a bright note. And so with these different brew methods, we're going to explore how the different flavor notes are affected by the levels of sediment and oils. The sediments generally affect our bitter notes, and the oils generally affect our bright notes. And so with the French press, we are going to get a lot of those sediments because we have no paper filter on there. It's just a screen filter, so a lot of those sediments are going to make its way through. And same with the oils. So with the French press, we're going to have a coffee that's really heavy in sediments and really heavy in oils, so we're going to get a lot of those bitters and a lot of those bright notes as well. And so in this coffee, since we have bitter floral notes and bright raspberry and toffee sweetness, we are going to get a pretty smooth floral bitter flavor because the floral bitters isn't nearly as intense as like a chocolate bitter. And then the raspberry and toffee sweetness is going to be pretty smooth as well because raspberry does have a sweet or a brightness to it, but doesn't necessarily have a brightness compared to like an orange or a lemon. So it's going to be very subtle in that bright category, and then we're going to get a really, really nice sweetness as those bitters wash away. Ooh, that's really good. I don't think I've tried the Rwanda Sholi on the French press yet. That is delicious. And so with this, we're getting a lot of those floral bitter notes. And then because the raspberry brightness is so subtle, I'm getting a lot of that toffee sweetness because the floral bitters are pretty bitter and fairly smooth, and they wash away pretty quickly. So as we start to get those raspberry notes, the sweetness really comes through because of the lack of the bitter flavor. And so that's important to express when we talk about like sweet notes in coffee, is it doesn't actually necessarily taste sweet. It just tastes sweet compared to the lack of the bitter notes that we get when the bitters of the coffee first hit our tongue, because that's like the first sensation that we get on our tongue is the dark bitter notes. And then the dark bitter notes start to wash away and clear off our tongue. And then because the bitters are starting to wash away, the leftover flavor notes, the lingering notes, have almost like a sweetness to it because the bitters, in contrast, are gone, so that coffee almost tastes sweet. And so now we're going to taste the pour over. So with the pour over, we are filtering out a lot of those sediments, but we're only filtering out some of the oils. We are going to get a different oil to sediment ratio. And so with this, because we're getting more oils, our cup of coffee isn't going to be as bitter as a French press. And then we're going to get a little bit more of those bright notes from the coffee, and a little bit more, and probably less of that sweet flavor actually, because if we're toning down that bitterness, the contrast between the bitters to the transition to those raspberry notes is going to be less predominant, and so it's going to taste less sweet because that vast contrast isn't going to be there, giving us that that appeal that it's sweet to us. Oh yeah, so not nearly as bitter as the French press. Very bitter but smooth. So we've got some really smooth floral bitters, but this one, the bitters are definitely don't come out as much. And because they don't come out as much, we're getting a lot more of that bright raspberry flavor in the beginning alongside with those floral bitters. And then as the palate starts to clear, we're not getting a whole lot of that sweet toffee. We're getting a little bit of that toffee nut, but it's not nearly as sweet as the French press. So that French press has a little bit more of that sweet after flavor. And the only reason why we get that sweet after flavor is because the intense bitters that we're getting right off the bat. And so the contrast to the bitters isn't as intense on the regular pour over because we're toning down those bitter notes, and so it's not going to taste as sweet, but we get a lot of those raspberry notes at the beginning of the cup that you don't really get until those bitters wash away in the French press. So the pour over is definitely a much brighter cup of coffee than the French press. Okay, let's finish this off so we have some room. Very smooth. So far between the pour over and the French press, I prefer the French press just because we get a little bit more of the bitter floral notes, which is really smooth. I like it because the bitter florals are really smooth. Because normally when you get bright florals, the bright florals give you a dry palate. This, not so much. We're just getting those bitter florals in the beginning, and as it washes away, we get a subtle raspberry notes and a really sweet toffee flavor. And that's what I really like about it, is the sweet toffee flavor that comes through. It tastes great, and then the fact that the French press really brings that out makes this brew method my favorite so far. Okay, so now we're going to compare the Chemex to the French press. So with the Chemex is a little bit different than the pour over. With the Chemex, it has an extra paper, 2 extra paper layers, and then the paper is also a little bit of a thicker material. So with this, we do change the grind setting, so it's a coarser grind, so the water passes through a little bit easier. But also at the same time, that extra paper layer does slow down the water pass-through process. So what's happening is the oils that would normally make its way through the paper in a regular paper filter are going to be, more of those are going to be captured in this extra paper layer. And so what we're doing is we're absorbing more of those oils. And so now we have a more of an even cup when it comes to sediments and oils. And so with this, we should get a very similar flavor to the French press, except instead of it being so bold and intense, it's going to be a little bit smoother and cleaner. So we're going to get those bitter floral notes, and then as those bitter floral notes, we should get a really clean raspberry and toffee sweetness. Oh yeah, you get like a really smooth bitterness, almost chocolatey, but not quite there. It's definitely got that floral flavor because it's got that impact on the sides of your tongue. And then as it washes away, we're getting that smooth raspberry flavor. It's not as sweet as the French press because the contrast difference in the bitters isn't necessarily there, because we definitely brought down the bitters in the Chemex because of the drop in sediments. But it does have more of a sweetness to it than the regular pour over, because we're not getting as much of those raspberry notes from the oils. And so with this, it's definitely like a much more tame version of the French press that doesn't have that sweet flavor either. Because that French press, because we're getting so much of those bitter floral notes, it's giving us that appeal of sweet toffee after the bitters wash away. And so this one is really good. I actually probably prefer the Chemex over the pour over as well, just because we're not getting as much of those cherry notes. We're getting more of the bitter florals. Yeah, we're definitely getting a lot more of those bitter florals. And then the toffee and cherry really come through because the bitter florals aren't as strong and it's not as sweet. And so it's got more of a, this has more of like a tame, bitter flavor all the way through, while the French press is, has that, it really has that toffee sweetness at the end. And so that's why I do this, is because to fully learn what we like about our coffee, we have to explore our coffee in all the different forms, and that includes the brew methods. And each different brew method requires a different grind amount, and a different water amount. And getting everything right in proportion is really important to make sure that your coffee tastes good. And so that's essential to brewing your coffee, is making sure that we brew our coffee correct, because the people who grow our coffee, they put a lot of time and a lot of work into making sure that our the coffee that they grow makes it to our table. And if we improperly brew our coffee, it's a disservice to the people who put all that hard work into making this delicious coffee all the way here. And especially with these small lot coffees where they have specialty stories. And so, with the Rwanda Sholi has a is really important to me. Any coffee from Rwanda is really important just because of the development that is going on in that part of the world and the important changes that is going on in their society. So Rwanda Sholi, the word Sholi is short for abateraninkunga Sholi, and abateraninkunga Sholi means mutual assistance. And so the word Abattoirin and Kungabasholi is really important to that part of the world, because to have a word that means mutual assistance in a part of the world where you have different tribes who believe in different things, and because they believe in different things, or they require more land, and the only way of getting land to them is to fight amongst other tribes. And so you have this society in that part of the world. A large part of the history has been fighting amongst tribes for land rights. And after the genocide, after World War II, when one of the tribes went around and started killing all the men and children of the tribe and leaving just the men behind, uh, there was a massive movement in Rwanda that brought a lot of the different tribes together. And it's really cool because the coffee industry really revolves around this story and has really helped these people thrive in this new age and new change in their society and the way that they do things over there. And it's really allowed them to make these movements. And so for them to have a specific word that means mutual assistance is really important for them, because it's a really big shift in their societal beliefs. And instead of fighting each other, we're going to come together and work together, and we're going to build a better infrastructure, a better economy, and have education for our kids in a part of the world where it's dangerous to have an education for specific groups of people. And so for them to take up this role of change in this part of the world, and to inspire people to come together instead of fight each other for land, it's allowing them to create more technology and better livelihoods for the people of Rwanda. There's tons of things that are going on in that part of the country that are creating better hospitals or giving them more access to medicine and other things like that. And it all has to do with them building a strong foundation for their economy. And with coffee and the exports of coffee and just the different farms that they're creating out there, is really giving them the economy that they need just to pour back into it, so that they can build the better infrastructures and upgrade their hospitals and have specific projects that are going on in that country that allows them to adopt specific technologies to create better medical practices or make it easier to get access to medicines and other things like that. And there's a lot of cool things going on in that part of the country that is making it better for the people to live. And it's going to inspire other people in the neighboring countries where they still have a lot of violence and they're still got a lot of problems going on, to help everyone come together and create a better society for themselves and a better world in that part of the world, so that they can live sustainably and create an education and jobs and leadership roles for themselves, and create a better place to live. And so that's what the Rwanda coffee means to me. It's just pure inspiration. What the Rwandan people have gone through, what they've come through, and where they are now is just an inspiration to what the human race is capable of, and how we can go through so much devastation and then come out of it in such a better place, and then just look forward to a better future and create a better future for our kids, and not really hold that against anyone else, and then just hope for the best and continue to seek education. And literally the whole motto of leave the place better than when you found it. And so that's basically what's going on, and it's amazing to see the progress that they're doing over there, especially with some of the projects like Zipline. And so it's really cool, really inspiring, and I hope that these stories inspire you guys to learn a little bit more about coffee culture and how the coffee that we drink here at our table impacts the people across the world who grow it, and how every cup that we drink might be helping someone build a hospital or plant new farms to make more money, or build a school to educate their children so that they can pursue something other than a life as a farmer. So it's really cool to see a lot of this happen, and it's really cool to be a part of the coffee culture and learning about it and then sharing it with you guys. So thank you so much for joining me on today's live stream. It was an honor to have you guys. For those of you guys who are here for the first time, it was an honor. And for those of you guys who are returning, thank you so much for continuing to support this channel. If you guys would like to see more videos, click on the link above, and then the link down below is just a video that YouTube recommends that YouTube thinks that you might like. Alright, thank you guys again, and have a great day, and enjoy your coffee.